Hi, good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good noon to those of you elsewhere. I'm Arthur Demrich, Director of the Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our February 2021 Innovative Lives program featuring Jessica Matthews. Today's program is really part of the Lemelson Center's core mission to document inventors for future historians to write about, even as we educate the public about the importance of invention and innovation, and aim to engage audiences from across the United States and indeed around the world in understanding what an inventor faces on a daily basis, the structural barriers and selective supports, the constraints of materials, the constraints of funding, the constraints of how people see you, and the many failures that in some cases lead to remarkable success. And in that, the joy of seeing how your work can change the world. We hope this program series actually helps empower you, the people watching, in how you think about and use technology. We live in a moment, a historical moment of incredibly rapid technological change, and yet we humans need to be in charge of technology. We need to make choices about what technology to integrate into our lives and choices about which technologies to advance. Advance to improve our economy, improve our lives, and improve equity and justice. And a minute ago, I mentioned some of the structural barriers and constraints inventors face. And so in February, of course, as we celebrate Black History Month, structural racism is a key issue for us to call out. And in doing so, think about and act to make change. The invention and innovation ecosystems are not set apart from American society and American history. They are in fact part and parcel of it. Amanda Gorman, speaking at the inauguration a couple of weeks ago, had some powerful lines in the very powerful poem, The Hill We Climb. Being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. As you'll hear from today's featured guest, structural constraints are also built into our world based on historical path dependency. Our electrical grid originated with Edison's light bulb and the light bulb demonstration in 1882 of a power plant and how to distribute electricity. But today we want more flexibility and dual directionality in the electric grid. And we need to expand the opportunities that come with more diverse energy sources. So how we repair our past involves both the social and political dimensions that get a lot of attention, but also scientific and technical pathways that we sometimes ignore that are incredibly profound to how we build our world. And so those are some of the big issues we're going to tackle, even as we learn about a very remarkable and exciting inventor, Jessica Matthews. I'm now pleased to introduce my colleague, Monica Smith, the head of exhibitions for the Lemelson Center. Monica is a historian of technology who has published on the history of the electric guitar, the role of play in becoming an inventor, about the factors that go into the emergence of regional innovation and technology clusters. Among other roles, Monica is a lead on our next research and exhibition initiative, Game Changers. Monica, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Arthur. And I'm really excited to have this opportunity today to introduce to all of you Jessica O. Matthews. She is the founder and CEO of Uncharted Power, an award-winning sustainable infrastructure company that transforms the ground beneath us into an industrial IoT platform for streamlining the integration, deployment, and management of critical infrastructure like power lines, broadband, sidewalks, and water pipes. And I'm going to let her explain that shortly. But she's also someone who started an inventive career early. And so that's very inspirational as well. She started at the age of 19 with her first invention, the socket, an energy generating soccer ball. And by the age of 22, when I was still just out of college, Jessica had founded Uncharted Power as a power solutions company before expanding into integrated infrastructure solutions. Her success in entrepreneurship has led her to receive a lot of accolades, including a White House invitation from President Barack Obama to represent small companies for the signing of America Invents Act in 2012. And in 2016, she raised what was at the time the largest Series A round ever for funding, raised by a Black female founder in history, and was selected to ring in the NASDAQ opening ceremony bell, representing all Forbes 30 under 30 alumni. I could go on, but just for a little personal background, she's a dual citizen of Nigeria and the United States. And I look forward to talking a little bit about that influence on her work. She has degrees in psychology and economics from Harvard, where she also earned an MBA. And she has been listed on at least 12 patents with more pending. Probably by today, she's got more, so she can tell us about that too. So with that, I want to turn and say hello and welcome to Jessica. It's so great to have you here. And if I may kick things off, happy birthday. I understand it's your birthday this week.
It's coming up. So first of all, thank you so much for your introduction, Monica. And thank you to the Lemelson Center for giving me a chance to, I guess, share a bit of my story in real time. That's one of the favorite things that I heard about you guys. You know, we often hear about inventors and their inventions after the fact. And so I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and have been doing. And yes, my birthday, I will be 33. I have no problem saying my age because I feel like I'm out here with it. Like, so why not? I will be 33 this Saturday. So
congratulations. You've done a lot for 33.
Hey, I still haven't made a TikTok video yet though. So I don't know.
That can be on your to-do list. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And you know, part of why we're featuring you this month is not just for Black History Month, but because you really represent a lot of what we want to share about inventors at the Lemelson Center. We're really trying to get people to understand that invention is happening all the time by people around us, that it's done by diverse people, it's done by women, not just men, and that it's really an opportunity to showcase people like you who are working in the field now and the impact you're making and the impact you hope to make as well. So it'll be exciting to get to watch your career as you continue. I'm kind of going to do a little bit of this is your life, if I can. You know, it's helpful, I think, to get a bit of your background before we kick off to really more of the details of what we're doing today. So could you just talk a little bit about growing up in Poughkeepsie with your family and kind of what influences you had that maybe put you on this path?
Yeah, you know, so gosh, I had a really fortunate childhood. You know, and I think primarily both my parents are very much innovators in their own way. My dad did applied mathematics, electrical engineering, got his PhD in technology operations, and actually developed algorithms for IBM to improve their supply chain methodologies and develop solutions to kind of smooth out the electrical pulses for different data centers they had as a staff engineer before then going on to launch his own company as well. And so he calls himself a scientist. He's actually hilarious on Instagram and on Twitter. He calls himself IQ breeder, which is a broader, more ridiculous thing about Nigerian fathers, which we'll just put aside. But, you know, and so like, I think this kind of love for science, this belief that when there's a problem, you can solve it kind of methodically, I get from him. But my mom is actually my favorite inventor. So my mom doesn't have any patents. My mom went to art school first and then, you know, went and got her degree at York and Pace. Actually, they met in graduate school when they were kind of taking cross classes. They met in Brooklyn. And, you know, but her whole vibe has always been, you can create the world that you want, and more of a kind of artistic way of things, and more of like well, this is what's pragmatic, I don't care, this is what you can do. And so I had that upbringing, and then I think couple that then with the juxtaposition of spending time growing up in upstate New York in Poughkeepsie, and also spending time in Nigeria, where my father spent most of his time primarily for work and different family obligations, where my cousins live, where my aunts and uncles live. And so I had this very real kind of almost like split context of the world that we've decided is the default. And for some, you know, I think that maybe would be something that would be easily overlooked. But for me, that's where I found my purpose, because I could see that there were some things that really didn't work in Nigeria that we take for granted in the United States, particularly related to power and, you know, just reliable energy access. And yet I could also see that there were opportunities to leapfrog, I think, in ways that we also hadn't always considered in the US. So for example, a lot of times my cousins in Nigeria, they often had to deal with situations where they couldn't fully charge their phone, but they almost always had a better cell phone than I did. It was weird. Like It was like,
Yeah.
so I think in knowing that the world is as it is, right? That what we kind of got used to in terms of infrastructure and power here in the US was not this incredibly scalable status quo, because that model wasn't working in Nigeria. It gave me the opportunity to dream of the world not as it is, but as it could be, and sort of just put me down this path of having, I think, a more global but also local perspective on what the problems might be and how I might be able to play a role.
Did you have other people in your life besides your parents who sort of helped inspire you or mentor you? Did you have, say, teachers that really kind of helped push you, or just was it other, family, friends, or was it really just very, besides really family driven?
I mean, listen, I tell people this a lot. Nigerian mothers are like tiger moms, except louder. So, I remember she would be watching Oprah and see some kid do something amazing on Oprah. And then she would come to me and my sister and say, "Oh yeah, are you forbidden to do this too?" And then it'd be this whole thing no, your book, and this whole just this pressure for excellence. So you don't, when you're a Nigerian child, you don't need a whole lot more to get you to do something, because there's always this threat of being sent to the village. So I mean, that was obviously, I think, massive. For me, I grew up idolizing Bill Nye the Science Guy. I like to tell people that I'm like the love child of Bill Nye the Science Guy and Beyonce and everything that I can do. But Bill Nye, I was way more Bill Nye growing up. And so I think for me, the biggest thing was that science seemed like a way to make magic real. And I was given the space to think about things in this way because my father was a scientist and an entrepreneur in his own right, and my mother believed in drawing the world like as if it's art in the way that you want it to be, in almost like a magical way. And then I think it was less of a specific person saying, "Hey, you can do this," as much as it was me seeing my family really needing something, right? And kind of saying, what else can I do in a situation where I know my family needs support other than try, right? It just didn't sit well for me. And so I remember kind of my origin story with all of that starts when I was 17. And I was actually in Nigeria for my aunt's wedding. We lost power as expected. It was just a common thing. And I remember what happened kind of set me down this path. We brought in a diesel generator and to kind of just attempt to keep the festivities going. And the fumes were so horrible that I started to complain. And my cousins, who are actually engineers, young men in their 20s, what they said was not, "Okay, yes, here's how we can solve the problem," but rather, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it." And I remember thinking, get used to what exactly?
Yeah.
This is horrible for the environment. Living with a kerosene lamp is like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
But I think more, this is horrible for the people in this room. And yet what you're telling me is that at a time when you should see the whole world as your oyster, at a time where as young men in Nigeria with engineering degrees, when you could be thinking about some sort of public-private partnership, some sort of innovation that could fix this problem, what you've now told me is that the way you want to solve your problems by pretending like it doesn't exist, and just kind of accelerating down this path of essentially dying, right? Because we know this stuff is horrible for us. We know that it's killing us.
Right.
And
if I could just interrupt for a second.
Of
So
course.
I assume this, in a way, then you're coming from this other culture that wasn't accustomed to that, probably gave you this new sort of insight that they, being just around it all the time, just took as the status quo, right?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I sat there and I was still very naive about the world, but something seemed wrong. Science is the way you can make magic real. If you can make magic real, then why are we accepting this? And what ended up happening after that year, when that happened, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's sad, but I didn't necessarily have a solution there. When I came back to the US after that summer, 3 members of my family actually passed away, all on that same cousin's side. Actually, those cousins lost their father, their grandfather, and their aunt, my mother's sister. And they were all from things that were either avoidable or at least could have been delayed if the things that we take for granted were available to them, right? Like no one thinks about what happens when you lose power and you're at the hospital. You know, it's crazy that they're paying more per kilowatt hour there technically, but they don't have the infrastructure to pay into. And so to me, when people, it was less of a, here was the kind of mentor who said, here, you can do it, as much as it was the idea that there were members of my family who died thinking the same thing that my cousins think or thought at the time. That was kind of my true north. I was like that. I could dedicate my life to making sure that didn't happen. And it just felt fulfilling. And then everything else was just kind of a means to that end, and continues to be a means to that end.
So was there a particular thing besides that, or was it really that incident that got you thinking about the kind of projects you would do in college? Like, do you really have a set goal of like, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to become that problem solver? Or what was your kind of vision?
Oh, yeah. So that happens. First, there's a summer experience, then that tough year for my family. And, you know, sometimes families go through tough years. I'm sure quite a few when you think about what 2020 was. But then I'm already kind of in college, and I'm just kind of doing my thing and going, you know, in my sophomore year. And there was a class called Idea Translation, Affecting Change Through Art and Science. I remember my dad is the scientist, my mom is the artist, but still very Nigerian pragmatic, if that makes any sense. And I thought that was interesting. Mostly I heard that they gave you some funding to come up with cool things. I've always wanted to invent. Like I said, I idolize Bill Nye. But they gave you a little bit of space to do it. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And I was like, well, I'm not. At the time, I didn't consider myself an artist. I didn't even consider myself a scientist, even though when you actually look at the definition, science is the study of life. And so if you're living, you are halfway there. But I did see the value in my lived experiences and my observations. And so I remember sitting in that class kind of thinking through, okay, well, what is art to me? What is like kind of the science to me? What can I pull together? And that's when I came back to that experience and thought, well, is there a way that you can address this issue through art and science? And, you know, at the core, the science initially for what ended up being my first flagship invention when I was 19, the energy generating soccer ball, that was, you know, that was basic honors physics. Like it wasn't, it's like, okay, kinetic energy, the energy of motion. We know how all these different things work. It was actually the combination of art, because when I had to sit down and think, well, it's not just what's beautiful, but what is already working in the lives of people like my cousin, what's already working in communities in Nigeria, what's so authentically beautiful that it not only amplifies existing behavior, but it creates a bridge between what's working and what's not working. And I was, you know, majoring in psychology at the time, so I'm coming at it from that perspective as well.
Right.
And that's what that's what kind of combined the concept of soccer to this, right? These technologies already exist from the perspective of dynamos, you know, windmills, all these different things are already demonstrating this, but tying it to soccer, tying it to what people were calling, you know, the most beautiful game, for sure, the most popular game in the world, that was really motivated. Well, so one, it was present because of my lived experiences, but it was motivated specifically because I was in a class, taking a class that I really needed an A in, because I kind of had a little bit too much fun my freshman year, and so I really had to be on my ish. And so yeah, like it's like almost like the rock in the hard place, right? Like I always knew I wanted to create something, but then I had that perfect moment to actually push and try things in a slightly more risk-free way.
Did you have people in your class that you worked with, or others who kind of brought other ideas that helped, you know, you think through your problem and how you were going to solve it?
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, we were in a group project, right? And so like as standard when most group projects, you know, you have, you know, one or two people who are kind of really in it, going back and forth with different ideas, you know, kind of a person who's like middle there, you know, and like one or two moments where like you're helpful. The other person where it's like, why are you here, man? Okay, fine. Like, and so that's the kind of structure that you have. I definitely would not have been in a situation where I would have been able to even honestly even come up with the name, right? Like I think that the name came from a lot of conversation. So when a lot of us also had experiences in the developing world, so we could bring that to the story and say, this is true. This really is the common thread through all of our experiences to make us feel like this could be meaningful.
So I mean, we run into this a lot with the patent system where some people think like, oh, I can't be a patentee, or, I wouldn't pursue a patent for a variety of reasons. Now you've got a patent on this. So who sort of drove that? Did somebody say, wow, this is amazing, you should get a patent? Did you already know about the patent system? Like, how did that come about?
I mean, listen, I went to Harvard, so it wasn't like people were not talking about patents, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I was lucky in that situation, and we had advisors in the class that helped us with the initial drafting. And the thing about the patent process is that it's designed to be collaborative. So like that first patent had every single person who touched it, even the people who just taught us how to write the patent, then were able to put their name on that patent. Now, later, when you want to commercialize something, you have to create a company, and it's standard to sign over your rights to the patent, but it doesn't take away your inventorship there too. And so, nowadays they have a lot more resources, I think, available online. A lot of different things you can do to kind of research and Google it. I like to tell people I got a PhD in Google because it was it was a mad dash of Googling, and really hasn't stopped, honestly, for the last 14 years. But the patent process, listen, it's incredibly daunting, and that's fair. And you're not insane to think that it's daunting. But I think the key thing is just to know that there are steps and that there are people there to help. So the first thing is getting a provisional patent, which is really just getting your ideas down and trying to organize them in a way that makes sense. And then you have a year to go and find help. And a lot of the innovation process, if you're not a patent writer, is actually being really good at knowing what part of your idea you should keep to yourself and what part you have to get really skilled and efficient at sharing so you can get help and resources. In the same way that you can't really build a company by yourself, you can't invent something meaningful by yourself. So even if you have a concept, recognizing that the way you choose to do something and kind of getting insight on that is also part of the innovation and patent process. Recognizing that the way you think about supply chain, the distribution, color, there's so many different things. And so my biggest advice I think I would give people there is recognizing that the patent process is more, I think, related to organizing a way to share ideas and to allow you to gain resources around that idea. But it's not something where you should feel as if it's only valuable if you're the only person who has their name on that patent. It should be more important that you create something that people really need, that solves problems, or something that you can learn from and grow from there, than just kind of having your sole name on a patent.
Mm-hmm. So when you graduate and you decide to pursue this, how did you get started, and what were some of the challenges you faced of trying to be an entrepreneur, at age 22?
Let's see.
I know it's a big question.
I'm like thinking through the years of all of this stuff. Well, I think that the most important thing for me in my career has been recognizing that the most important step in the innovation process is the articulation of the problem. Because the way that you articulate the problem that you're trying to solve then begets the solution. And what you have to ask yourself at any given moment is, is the thing that I'm building actually like resulting in the impact that I want? And so, when I was first starting out, I thought that the problem was inspiration. I thought that the problem was that really smart people who should be thinking about infrastructural solutions to address things like reliable power access, that they weren't, right? That they were just kind of accepting the status quo. And so in articulating the problem that way, the solution then was something that would inspire people to see this kind of very scary, archaic world of energy like a game, something that was worth fighting. And so we kind of went down that path, and we explored that and started to find different partnerships to help with distribution. Initially, it wasn't even so much investing or getting investors. I am a Black woman, so that didn't seem viable, and it still is hard if I'm being honest. So found a lot of partnerships to kind of get the product out there and see if it had that result. Developed energy generating jump ropes to kind of expand the product line with that same goal. Developed a really amazing curriculum called Think Out of Bounds that we actually still use to this day in its like fourth edition to kind of add more of that structured education to, you know, around our distributions. And got to the point where we were looking at how do we expand and getting a lot of opportunities to make more kind of kitschy energy generating things like energy generating strollers or, you know, cricket balls and things like that. And we had them and we made them all. There was a time where I almost lived in like a Willy Wonka world of kinetic energy toys. But, you know, it was around 2016. And at this time we had raised our kind of first big round when I knew it was weird. I had to go back to what got me into this. What got me into this wasn't just to inspire a bunch of people. It was inspiration is what I thought was the solution for a problem that was specifically related to my family not having access to infrastructure that I think is a human right. And as a result, they're not living their lives to their fullest. And in fact, their lives are getting cut short. And my hope was that in the scale and work that we were doing, that we would inspire people to start to do what needed to get done to solve that problem. And it wasn't happening as fast as I thought it needed to happen. You know, the time it would take to actually bring an energy generating stroller to market would have been 2 years, but then that would have just been that versus an infrastructural solution. And so, you know, this was also the time when around the election, a bunch of things just happening. And I remember thinking, why am I so afraid of developing an infrastructural level solution? Like we're developing all this IP, all this tech. We're advising Fortune 100 companies on their, you know, energy generating strategies for their different products. Why aren't we getting there? And you know, I think that's another big part of this process is recognizing that sometimes like imposter syndrome, I'm sure everyone's heard about it a lot, can be one of the biggest obstacles that you're facing. And it took a lot. It took quite a few things that we can get into if there's time for me to realize that I was worthy, not just worthy, but actually the right person to innovate and develop technologies within infrastructure, right? And actually get to that level. And so, you know, from that period of time, from around 2011 to 2016, it was figuring that out, growing in that way. And then once we made that decision, figuring out how you take all your learnings and then essentially pivot to apply to this bigger opportunity, bigger problem to solve.
Actually, somebody asked in the chat, but I just saw it come up. What is imposter syndrome? So do you mind just saying a little bit about it and then how it was for you? Like, what was it for you that was the challenge?
Imposter syndrome is thinking that you're not good enough. Imposter syndrome is thinking that you don't belong somewhere. Imposter syndrome is feeling as though you're, you know, even if you had the opportunity, you wouldn't know what to do with it. And so, you know, I will say that to a certain extent, I was incredibly lucky because I came of age from the age of 20 to 28 when Michelle Obama was our first lady. And I'm not sure how I would have been able to even get to the point where I am today if I did not have a very clear example of a tall, dark-skinned Black woman, Ivy League educated, but also not one to with, if you know what I mean. If I didn't have all of that, you know, I don't know if I would have, the imposter syndrome would have gone beyond just infrastructure to the point of just, do I belong in any space? Do I belong on any stage, saying what I think and holding that true? And so I will be incredibly grateful just for her existence. Now, but that said, specifically focusing on an infrastructure, no one in the room looked like me, not just because of my gender or my race, even my age. You know, the average age of someone working in energy is 55. White men, like straight, cis white men at the age of 55. That's the average for the space. So I'm sitting here like, where do I even belong? How does this work? And I think the biggest thing that happened was it's kind of weird to say it now, but actually the election was probably the most inspiring thing that happened for me.
The 2016?
The 2016 election, yeah. If I'm being very honest, a lot of people say, how inspired were you when Barack Obama was president, when he became president? I was like, well, listen, I'm very happy it happened, but he was a constitutional scholar. He's an incredibly talented man who it would make sense that he was president. I do not think I should be president just because Barack Obama was president. No, I'm not inspired to do that. But believe it or not, when Trump won, I was not expecting it. And what became very clear to me is that while I'm feeling all this imposter syndrome and kind of creating a lane for myself and telling my team, someone else will do the infrastructure, we'll just do this, let's focus on what we know. People who, have no business doing things are shooting their shot, right? And so while we're sitting here saying, are we the best people to do something? You have other people actually asking themselves, am I the worst? And when I came to my team, I said, listen, if this guy can be president, I can be president. Period. Stop with that. Let's just leave it there. And two, if this guy can do infrastructure, we can do infrastructure. And so we kind of corralled as a team and started to say, okay, well, what can we apply? What can we do? And started to look at how we can actually develop energy generating speed pumps with that, which would be the actual precursor to energy generating roads. Because again, at the time, we're still thinking energy is the main problem. And maybe they just need an infrastructural model, maybe to actually rethink the way we're delivering energy. And we did have some people who didn't think that we can do it, but we were able to develop a system that produced a kilowatt of power when you drove over it, and 5x the numbers of some of the world's leading kinetic energy labs, actually in different academia settings at the time. So it ended up working out, I guess.
Well, so as you're getting to that, before you could actually show somebody, did you have people, this is a question that came in the Q&A from one of our participants, did you struggle where people said something like, well, everything's been invented or everything's been discovered, or, well, we've all done that because we're the ones who've been here because we're 55 and we've been here forever and we've already tried that kind of thing? And how did you sort of overcome all that?
Not as much for the energy generating soccer ball and those play products, because it was novel, it was cute, it was fun, but it wasn't actually pressing the kind of, the status quo, the system. It wasn't disrupting the system. It was just like, oh, that's nice. When I started to kind of poke at the system, saying, well, why are you guys doing this? And why are you doing this? And like, the grid doesn't make sense if you do this. That's when it was just like, who are you? What's going on? And it was hard, and it remained hard, The biggest thing that helped was off the record conversations with people who agreed that there was a problem but didn't know the answer. And so I was very lucky to talk to like chairman and CEOs of utilities who would say, off the record, you're right. Like people like VPs like at the utilities who are just like, off the record, yes. And I remember being like, so, I only noticed that this was a problem because it's definitely not working in Nigeria. But people here, this was about a year or two before the PG&E issues and all of that. I'm like, people here think this is okay when it's not. It is not. And they're like, yeah, we just didn't invest in the R&D. And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, we're on to something. If when you poke and poke and poke, the answer is, how long until they figure it out? I'm like, that's your answer? Like, right? So the best I can say is, the concept of an informational interview cannot be overstated. It seems so kind of like neutral and boring, but the key thing for me has been like if you can give yourself the time to ask questions and learn, and don't be afraid of getting information that kind of negates what you're trying to invent. Because again, if clearly there's a problem, otherwise my family would have what they need. Like we would all live in a world where there wouldn't just be a storm and then we'd be losing power for whatever period of time. So no one can shake your understanding of the fact that there's a problem. Something's not working. And it's now up to you to be almost like an adventurer, right? It's more like being Indiana Jones and trying to find out exactly why this isn't working, and then build to solve that. And so it helped me and ultimately get to the point of where we are now, and realizing that it wasn't just an energy issue, realizing that energy was a big problem, but that in general, the issue is in the way that we build infrastructure across the board. And, you know, there's a lot of things that we're doing as a company right now that we would not be doing if we didn't start from energy generating soccer balls to energy generating speed bumps to now platforms that help with the way you build power, civil, and smart city infrastructure. That there's just no way I think I would have gotten to this point if I wasn't really consistent with the poking and the willingness to learn.
Yeah. So you've brought up a couple interesting points that I want to delve into a little more before we really get into your current project, which is, you've said two things that really struck me that I've seen. You know, one is that in some developing countries, like I went to Zanzibar, it's part of Tanzania, and they had no power at all on the islands, none. And so they were all, as you say, using diesel generators, which are expensive, they're loud, the fumes, it's just, you know, awful. Not to mention that you're basically in the dark all night because you can't possibly run them, you know, all day and night. And so, so seeing that problem when you just don't have any infrastructure essentially. But then in our country, we tend to have this aging infrastructure that you've sort of alluded to that we haven't done enough about to upgrade and change. And so we're kind of stuck with, dare I say, a dumb grid. So can you talk about like what you've seen in terms of maybe things that you learned from the Nigerian and other experiences where they sort of left technology, right? In some cases, like going straight to cell phones without having the whole telephone system.
Yes, the leapfrog.
And then you have this system here that's actually kind of just aged and uncared for and ignored that's now problematic.
Yeah, you know what it is? And like the example I give people when we, like, 'cause I remember building up our energy generating speed pump. We were so excited. Okay, it's doing great. And we went to try to actually scale it internationally and domestically. And we saw kind of two sides of the same problem that halted the scale, that started to make us realize that the issue is less about any one standalone solution and more about what you're plugging into, the platform, the grid itself. It was as if we had spent all these years developing this super sustainable, super cutting edge car, only to drive it on a road that didn't exist, or on a road that hadn't been updated in 150 years. So no matter what you've done with that car, if it's just a dirt path, barely even a road, or if it's a road full of potholes and all these other things, like, you're better off not even driving it. It just doesn't work. Your car is not going to get that far. And that's pretty much what we saw, that whether it was the lack of grid infrastructure or the aging grid infrastructure, any new energy solution was not going to really work unless you built it exactly the way that the aged grid especially wanted to accept it, right? So when you think about decentralized, kind of more micro or nano intermittent energy solutions, the grid's just not set up to handle it. Like it is, there are some things that people are trying to do to make it smart, but it's one of those things where if you actually look into it, it's, you know, it's like, am I smarter than a fifth grader? The grid is not. The grid is not, and there's nothing else to say. No shade, but also all the shade. When you actually look at what's going into it, it's concerning. You know, and I think we're seeing it also, especially with the EV cars. The grid in the U.S., for example, is AC. Totally understand why it's AC, but almost everything we use is DC. All of our tech, all of the EV charging stations, all of that stuff. It should be DC, and even just that disconnect is such a massive problem. And the existing grid is just not set up to be adapted. And so if you're not set up to accept innovation, then you're basically going to disincentivize innovation. And so that was a really interesting thing. I think the other balance of it too, again, in balancing both invention with actual business model innovation to actually get your solutions out to people, I was recognizing that there were kind of pros and cons to developing solutions that would either only be seen as a developing world solution or only for the US. You know, we found that from a financing perspective. It was hard to do projects overseas and get the investment we needed because it was just so far away from most of our funders. And so, you know, I think for us, the big thing again was to say, is there kind of a meeting point here? And like in terms of platforms, the grid and everything, that we can do something that would actually bridge from both sides. But I think, again, more importantly, was consistently saying, okay, we can keep trying to force our speed bump, you know, into this world. Or we can say, what exactly is making it so difficult for solutions like our speed bump to get to scale? And is that something that we can address given the experiences that we've already had in this space? And it ended up being that the answer was yes. And so much of our current platform leverages IP and concepts from our past solutions, but in a way that we, I guess, sort of thought maybe it could be relevant, but not in this specificity at all.
So one of the questions that came in, and I was thinking about too, is so how do we get from here to that smart grid that we really need to make your technology something that isn't sort of a one-off, but can actually be expanded from a small local project to a national one?
So that's a big question.
Big question, yeah.
It's a question that we've dedicated a few years answering, and we're actually getting ready to demonstrate in Poughkeepsie. So
tell us about that.
Made traveling hard, so
yeah.
Poughkeepsie, let's do it. The key, honestly, is thinking about the things that have leapfrogged in our consumer-driven lives, right? So take your smartphone and all the things that you experience with your smartphone, and thinking about infrastructure development, not as it currently is, but as something that's as convenient as downloading apps and managing the apps on your smartphone, will definitely streamline things. Like the core issue we have is that there are no economies of scale in the way that we develop and manage sustainable infrastructure and sustainable cities. Right now, if you want to do something like deploy a energy generating speed bump, it's such a siloed experience. It's such a disparate experience. It's such an overwhelming experience for the city government that they just say no, they don't even want to do it. And so what we have developed is like a true streamlined enablement platform. And we looked at all the things that were holding back technologies like ours and tried to kind of remove those obstacles. So for example, on the physical side, we have a modular serviceable paver that makes it easier to just put things in the ground without having to rip up things all the time. So from power cables to fiber optic to different like smart city technologies, now you can take this incredibly underutilized resource, the ground itself, and actually put all of your smart city technology inside of it and really lower the cost of kind of maintaining and upgrading that. Another big thing was kind of the digital interoperability of all this infrastructure. So right now, it's almost impossible for the energy grid to understand the data that's happening with the EV chargers, even with the street lights. They just don't understand each other, right? We often say, like something we've been saying at UP is the difference between integration and interoperability is, you know, just because you're in the same place doesn't mean you're on the same page. That's what's happening. We've been deploying all these smart products, but we're not actually building interoperable smart cities. And so a big part of our platform is actually leveraging and deploying this edge cloud that allows us to really automate using machine learning and artificial intelligence to streamline that process of interoperability and how you bring all those things together. And so that's a very exciting thing, and just showing that we can start seeing these insights and sharing data. And with this sharing of information, you know, we can actually use the new oil, right? Data as a new oil to replace the old oil, which is very exciting. And then there's like a few other things that we're doing there. I've been very blessed to have build an amazing team of individuals with a lot of experience, but also a lot of hustle that are just kind of all in. And so we still kind of come together and have these collaborative sessions of just talking through problems and thinking through the best way to solve them.
So talk a little more about the team aspect, because I think that's really important, how you pull together the right team, and how do you know when someone is sort of the person that you need in your team? Like, what is there a certain sort of team chemistry you look for? Is it certain backgrounds, or is there some sort of other quality that you see?
I think all of the above. You definitely want to actually do the research, talk to people, and start to understand the gaps on your team or in yourself that you want to augment. And then I think, beyond that, obviously culture matters. We like to make sure that everyone's in the room for the same reason, which is the same reason that brought me to this space in terms of trying to get to a world where we have universal access to smart, sustainable infrastructure. Because if we can get that access, if we can deliver this like it's a human right, then people will live in this world, right, in the way that we expect and we want. And so when we dig into that and say, I talked about the articulation of the problem, first thought that the reason why we don't live in this world where everyone has access to smart, sustainable infrastructure was because people weren't inspired to actually innovate in the space. Then we thought, well, maybe it's because people didn't have an infrastructural model of how they should think about energy, one of the primary driving critical infrastructure resources. And then we realized that the problem really was that there are no economies of scale in the development and management of these smart, sustainable communities. And when you don't have economies of scale, you disincentivize the development of all infrastructure. And this has actually been proven. The percent that we've spent on new infrastructure development just in the United States from 2007 to 2017 has gone down significantly. And then of course, within that bucket, if people aren't spending on any new infrastructure, they're not going to spend on smart and sustainable infrastructure. And so once we got to the point where we're like, wow, this is really what it is, then we can start to try to find people who could fill in the pieces on that. So for example, our new CTO that started just in January of this year, brilliant technologist, his name is Bill Pugh, has worked on smart grid solutions, smart city solutions, and then advised over 45 different cities over the last 6 years on their smart city integration. I was able to come in and say, well, here's what I've seen go wrong with the way these things are being developed and what part of the platform we need to actually address. Travis Shanahan, he was actually the chief cloud architect for Oracle. It's now our edge cloud architect. Came in and said, yeah, well, this is what the edge cloud would need to be to actually enable a cost-effective way of understanding what the energy infrastructure is doing in the same place as the parking infrastructure and the traffic infrastructure to be able to streamline all these things. And the list kind of goes on, right? You attract people, I think, with the mission. But in my experience, the best hiring decisions have come from really getting the problem articulated accurately, and then seeing who else agrees. And then we kind of all can come together and build.
Oh, that's great. So when you then, you're clearly stuck in a situation a bit where there are certain elements that have to become more standardized and upscaled for you to really be able to have the full impact you want. How much do you think you need a federal government sort of mandate and push to help that? Or is it really working through local communities like Poughkeepsie where you can prove that this works, that you then think it'll spread out? Like, what's top down or bottom up, or is there some combination?
We've been working in a world where, infrastructure is built locally. And so that's why we're so hyper focused in Poughkeepsie. It's an amazing city. It has so much promise and potential. And we're excited to really work with the stakeholders there and say, here's how you transform your city into a smart, sustainable city without all the cost and the time that you normally expect. And so that's very exciting to kind of see how we can scale there. And then from there, we want to do more, right? And go beyond that and go from 1 city to 10 cities, et cetera. And we're set up to do that, to understand how cities work and push. Now, with all that said, there's no harm in the top down. Normally, it doesn't make a huge difference, but with the stimulus funding especially, if there's a way to incentivize people to be looking for solutions like ours, a way to incentivize cities to actually prioritize not just investment in smart, sustainable infrastructure, but also more equitable deployment of that, right? More equitable partnerships and getting there. That just kind of accelerates where we want to be. And then I think for us also, especially when COVID starts to kind of stabilize and we're able to be more international again, Our hope and our goal is to take what we're doing in Poughkeepsie, and obviously there's so many things that make Poughkeepsie unique, but there are some core things that we know every city needs, that every single citizen wants, and be able to scale it from there. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity. Again, what we're finding is to realize that a lot of this is still art and science. A lot of the things that we've seen people do wrong in this space, it's because they were just leading with the science and not realizing that people are much more dynamic than that. And so what we've been finding actually is that what's helping us really understand how to think about interoperability, not just from a physical infrastructure perspective or digital infrastructure perspective, but also a social perspective, de-siloing the way the government engages with the citizens understand what the government's doing, and how they both understand what infrastructure solutions are available to them to help their problems in their community. Our way of doing that is similar to how we knew, or how a soccer ball would be the package that people wanted to understand power. And so it goes back to that concept I was mentioning earlier too, in terms of, sorry, there's a bell. We're all working from home.
Yeah.
In terms of imposter syndrome, because I spent so much of my time knowing immediately it was an infrastructural problem, but feeling like that couldn't be something that I could address, that I could innovate within, that I could lead a team around, because like, who am I? So let me start here. Let me go here and there. And the result ultimately was that actually I could, right? That I am. And there's still a lot of fear. It's very scary to be innovating in a space that very few people understand, but it's also something that feels very right. And I think that's probably one of my most favorite kind of things to reflect on in the innovation process. It's if you're doing it right, you're growing, you're learning, and you're also innovating on yourself, right? You're inventing yourself for the moment. And then before you know it, you're developing IT on wireless mesh energy networks and protocols, and you're developing platforms to streamline physical and digital infrastructure. And all it really was a whole lot of Google and a willingness to learn and pivot as necessary.
Well, on that point, and this is going to kind of combine a couple questions from our participants, but I think part of problem is that a lot of people don't even understand what infrastructure and energy, they just don't know enough, and don't know the issues. And it's not, dare I say, the sexiest, perhaps. People hear about like inventing apps or inventing, I'm going to make all this money, they don't. Or Shark Tank, someone brought up Shark Tank, how that's impacted sort of people's ideas of, I'm going to take this thing to market and entrepreneurial. But it seems like it's sort of like this magical, like you have this idea and you go out there and you get money and you put it on the market. You're talking about something that you knew going in was going to be a really long-term, push battle, up the hill against some systems that were really built in. So how do you address that?
I did not know it was going to take as long as it took. And I think that if I knew, I would have been too afraid to do it. I knew my why. I knew why I wanted to solve this problem. And I knew that the process was pretty fun, right? So like, it was fun to learn about supply chain, to learn about the basics of Faraday cages and of just general kinetic energy, and say, wow, this is cool. Like I think I'm getting somewhere. It was scary to realize this isn't getting me exactly where I want to go. So then what can I do? And then, but see, hey, we did something. All of these companies that said that we couldn't do it, we beat them. We did a better job. Okay, but wait a minute, why can't we scale it? That's scary, but still the juice always felt worth the squeeze. The growth for me always felt really, really worthwhile. I would always ask myself, is this the way I want to spend my life? And because I knew why I was pushing, and because I knew I was learning and growing, it felt very, very much like a no-brainer. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do on the day when you just want to like bang your head against the wall because you're so frustrated that somebody's not listening? Like, do you have sort of like, this is how I push myself to keep innovating?
For the last 7 years, I boxed 3 days a week. Boxing helps. Boxing helps a lot. Meditation is critical. And then honestly, It's just trying to be mindful of the fact that that I believe in myself, right? So what has helped was poking, and getting into the rooms with the people who I thought were so brilliant, who should be solving the problem, and being like, what? Oh my God. And then just being like, okay, I refuse to focus in on what I'm afraid of, to focus in on what I don't know. And you just push. And so it's really, really hard, but it's, at the end of the day, it took me a long time, but I would say probably within the last 2 years, I was just like, okay, this is going to be hard. I have a lot to learn, but I'm not the worst person to do this. And the more that we see the problems, I think perspective, again, experience, leaning into all the things that make me who I am, it's a competitive advantage. And so I think, again, all I can say is if I didn't enjoy the process, maybe it'd be a different story. And yes, there are mostly hard days, but for some odd reason, when it all comes together, it's like a cake. Like if you're just eating flour or eating egg, you're like, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever had. But and so all the parts are hard, but when you step back, you're like, this is a cake and this is amazing. And that's what it feels like. It feels like that kind of amalgamation of a life worth living. And yeah, it's just a blessing, honestly. That the innovation and building and inventing for the last 14 years has been an unbelievable blessing.
So we have a young person here, Coral, who is asking, how do you challenge someone like Coral to help with your cause and innovations? Like, how do you get young people to kind of understand what the system issues are, what they can actually do? I think a lot of times people don't feel the empowerment to come in and say, okay, I can help you fix that, because they think, they can't do it. So what are some things that they could do to help and would help them?
So the biggest thing that we do just as an organization, we have this program called Uplift, and we actually take our legacy products, our soccer balls and jump ropes and all that stuff, and we go into schools and we actually digitize this when COVID hit, and we teach kids how to be social inventors. We teach them how to look at their environment and not see it as being full of obstacles, but being full of kind of opportunities. We teach them about invention. We teach them about prototyping. We teach them about inventors that look like them, that did things like this at their age. And then we have them come up with inventions to solve these problems. And so it's less of a, here's how you fix my specific problem, which is now less technical and more just, once you have a company over a certain number of people, you become chief psychology officer, and you thank God I have a degree in psychology, because
I was going to say, yeah, you're well
prepared. A lot of time just kind of like, well, what do you feel now? How are you feeling? Okay. Or fundraising, which has more to do with just systemic racism and sexism. And those, if any of y'all want to come up with a solution for that, but beyond that, what's fun is that that engagement keeps us remembering that we're not trying to solve all the world's problems. No one company or person can do that. We are trying to unlock the potential of a world who could then solve their own problems. And that's what I think infrastructure is. It's giving people security and opportunity to actually see this world and say, I see a problem that I want to solve, and I'm not just going to accept the status quo. And so it's, that's been really fun, even kind of sometimes seeing in the communities that we work in, the inventions these kids have, and saying, wow, this is actually an infrastructure solution that they don't know it already exists. Let's see how we can bring this to the community. It's very exciting and honestly very inspiring for me. So hopefully when it comes to kind of how do you just jump up and do something, look around, and if there's something that you think should be better, don't just accept it, work on it. That's all you have to do.
Well, you sort of joked about it, but I mean, systemic racism and sexism is, of course, an enormous obstacle for a lot of people. And it's why we know that there continues to be this huge gap in especially patenting, but just invention in general. And we see this all the time, which is partly why we want to showcase people like you to show it doesn't, it's not just the Bill Nye types of the world that you can, you don't have to be the guy in the coat, lab coat. So, can you give an example of something that you ran into and how you overcame it?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know
Like,
it's a lot, but I think it's really important to address, because I think if we just go, oh yeah, it's this problem.
It's the micro moments that build up, right? So it's finding out that the only way to really close an investor is like, if you can relate to him as a male hanging out with him in the evening. This is pre-COVID, and if you attempted to do that as a woman, you would most likely be put in a very uncomfortable position where he may or may not proposition you, which happens a lot. It has happened to us a lot. And so then saying, well, I'm not going to put myself in that position, but if I'm not there in the evening at this place, then I can't really close the deal. It's, it's not being given the benefit of a doubt, and literally banging your head against the wall when you know that if you weren't under-resourced, you could do so much more, but people are asking you to deliver something that's only possible if you had the resources, right? And wondering like how much of your effort is actually going to trying to create that magic. Like to raise that Series A, we had to become a profitable company first. To raise our Series A, we were already generating millions of dollars in profit. To then be given the luxury to go back into R&D to actually solve the big problems, that's not normal. That 7 million, which at the time was the largest Series A that a Black woman had raised in a history, was the average amount that year. Otherwise, right? And so the way I kind of frame it, though, is that if you kind of think about this as preparing to solve big problems, preparing to build something that is somewhat daunting. You need to train. If you're going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, you need to train. You can't just jump and do it. And so I feel like not just me, but a lot of underrepresented founders are essentially training with 100-pound weights. We are just in the thick of very difficult training, and a lot of our counterparts that aren't facing these issues of kind of, again, more systemic blockages of just, okay, if I, on one hand, if I don't look like the person who I'm funding, then, there's I don't have that intangible connection, so I need to see more on paper. Or if I do look like the person I'm funding, but because of the world that we live in and the way that so much scrutiny is being placed on these relationships, I feel like I need to see even more before I could take this risk. Like all of that. What it does if you survive it is make you incredibly strong, so that if your counterparts aren't facing these things, they're working out with 25-pound weights. You're working with 100-pound weights. When the moment comes to do something epically large, like disrupt the way we build infrastructure around the world, let's call that a 200-pound problem. In my personal opinion, the person who's been training with the 100-pound weight is more likely to be successful than the person who's been training with the 25-pound weight. TBD on whether or not that's true, but that's how it feels. And the more that I think about even how our company made it through last year and grew, despite all the obstacles related to COVID, I do feel like that is true, to be honest, that we've prepared ourselves in a way for crazy uncertain times and really have honed in on how to innovate during times of uncertainty. And so it's hard, it's exhausting, but it's also exciting, right? The way you feel when you're getting ready for a big marathon or a race, and you know that you've had a hard training, but in some ways you're now even more prepared for the big show.
That's great. So I'm just going to ask a few quick questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up.
I
know you're probably you're going to lose your voice here if we keep going with you, but certainly going to lose mine. But so, just quickly, first of all, somebody asked, how did you go about developing your team in the beginning? So, now you have a team, you kind of know what you want, but how did you start out with that?
Trial and error. The same way you go about trying to find a husband or a partner or anything like that. Date a lot of people, think that you're in love, find out that you're not, try to end it as cleanly as you possibly can, and then get back on the apps and find your boo. Don't really know, except the apps aren't, it's less, it's less Bumble and more LinkedIn, right? Networking events, like it's less, some dating bowling thing and more going to conferences, putting yourself out there, right? Letting people know that you're looking, and actually making a list. Who do I want in a partner is the same thing of who do I want in a insert X role. At the end of the day, it all comes down to relationships. You need to know why you're there. You need to know what each person's going to bring to the table. And it's normal to get it wrong. In the best case scenario, you're going to get it right 40% of the time, right? And so but that's really what it is. And in the same way that when you're young, sometimes you date the wrong people, you think of yourself, you have grace for yourself in knowing that you're going to sometimes get the team building wrong too. Another really important thing that I had to learn though was that you can't hire away for like your lack of confidence in yourself. So many times in the early days, I kept on thinking, oh, well, that's too hard or scary for me to do. So let me hire someone who would know better. And you can't undervalue the kind of intuition that you have as a founder and an innovator, especially if you have a willingness to learn and teach yourself. And so just knowing that just because you don't have all the experience doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to lead and deserve to kind of lead in that space can also help you not kind of mistakenly overcompensate with some hires as well.
That's great. I do enjoy the dating analogy. I think that'll stick with people. So kind of to that point though, because you kept talking about, fortunately you have a lot of self-confidence and you're being able to sort of work through all this, but, do you have sort of practical, Rachel asked, do you have practical steps to overcoming imposter syndrome? Like, is there something that we can all use as sort of tips or tricks in those moments?
The only thing you can do is to talk to people. And it's almost like how they say, don't meet the people you admire, meet them so that you can see how human they are. And that's really what helps. Over time, it's a mix of obviously seeing yourself succeed, but meet the people who you think are so amazing. And you'll find that, yes, some of them really are, but a lot of times there's a kind of mystique that you've built. And so, I think that that's really the only thing that's helped me over time, saying, yeah, I'm very appreciative, or I very much admire this thing that's been done, but there's nothing here specifically that is so perfect that I can't at least attempt to jump in, and do it. And it's not something you can just do like, oh, I overcame my imposter syndrome. It is an ongoing thing. And it'll creep back in if you don't take the time to be diligent and having those exploratory conversations to kind of check yourself and check out what's going on around you.
All right, so we've got basically two more questions. I'm gonna stop the Q&A now because we're getting, I want to be cognizant of your time and energy too. But one of the people asked, can you tell us in your opinion the essential components of creating a smart city?
Certain. To me, the core thing that you really need in a smart city is obviously data. And I would say the interoperability of that data. Personally, kind of taking away all the jargon, a lot of people talk about smart, sustainable cities. In my opinion, there's actually an African proverb. It goes, in life, we seek to bequeath two things to our children: roots and wings. In my opinion, all this tech, all this infrastructure from 5G to AI to whatever, all it comes down to is a more streamlined, efficient way to deliver roots and wings to everybody. So like I mentioned earlier, security and opportunity, right? Security in your job, your ability to get clean water, clean power, to stay healthy, to provide for your family. But then your opportunity to grow and scale and not feel like you need to go to another city to do these things. And so there's quite a few technologies that enable this. The problem though is that the way we bring those technologies into that community, there's no economies of scale, right? So that's my personal definition of a smart, sustainable city. The way you make it smart and sustainable is streamlining the way all of these cool innovations can actually come together, work together, and honestly, yes, grow together, learn from that city and be a partner to the people who live there. Right now we have a lot of silos, and the inefficiencies are massive. And as a result, we're building smart products, but we're not building smart cities. I'll just put it that way.
Okay, interesting. So we have from a teacher or after school program. She says, I run an after school program in Newburgh, New York.
Hey!
Once the restrictions are somewhat relaxed with social distancing, would we be able to visit the projects that you have going on in Poughkeepsie? Is there something that can be seen?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're going to be
teaching her students about STEM, and the wave of the future. So this would be great.
Nice. Yeah, we are going to be working actually in the public right of way, on the sidewalk, and working on some cool experiences for people to be able to do a walking tour of what's going to come in Poughkeepsie. So in a couple of months, you don't even need to ask any permission. Just go to Poughkeepsie, and it should be hopefully pretty easy to find.
Great. Somebody has joined late but asked, what professional organizations are you a member of? Are you a member of like IEEE or other sort of those kind of organizations? Or are you more on the energy or entrepreneurial, or
For being really honest, I don't really have time to be part of any type of core organizational group. Mm-hmm. A lot of the groups where I think I do spend time, Visible Figures, I think, is one that's great. It's actually a group of Black women who've raised more than $1 million. And it's a support and development group. I'm really fortunate to be part of an accelerated program called Elemental Accelerated Program. And there's a cohort of companies that we do a lot of learning together. And they're all focused on how do you bring climate and sustainable infrastructure solutions to market, which is a very hard thing to do. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, so much of my time is spent kind of in the thick of it that I enjoy kind of more just meeting people and talking to people who don't all think the same way I think. It's more helpful for me to speak to people who are very different, who come from different walks of life, so that I can start to pull all that together into the vision that I have for the company.
Great. Okay, so we're going to ask the last one, but I want you to use this as a chance to move on to kind of what are you doing now, what's upcoming, what are you hoping for in the future? I want you to have a chance to talk about sort of your hoped for vision for the next, whatever timeline you want to put on it or have been thinking about it. But one of the questions is, how can we support you? And more directly, this person asks, do you sell stock in your company? So if you can talk about sort of the future and what you're looking for and how we can support in whatever way.
No, of course. Well, so one, we do actually bring on some individual angel investors sometimes, especially if they have a very specific interest in the work that we're doing, and are excited to kind of just generally learn more and be a part of it. And so definitely you can reach out to, what's the best email? I would send an email to contact us at u-pwr.co if you're interested in that. Also specifically within the project we're doing in Poughkeepsie, we've raised all of the funding really to initially demonstrate what's possible has been through grant funding with an amazing partnership with the Siegel Family Endowment and the Community Foundation of the Hudson Valley. And so if you want to make a tax deductible donation to that fund to help with the development of really, again, showing the city what's possible and showing the world what's possible, you can send an email there too and make a donation to the actual project fund. For us, with the funds that we do have, we're really working with the community to make sure that they feel as involved as possible. So we've already partnered with the City of Poughkeepsie School District to actually put 100 middle school students through our Uplift program and try to align the things that the city wants and the students want with what's possible to give people that experience of a more interconnected, collaborative way of developing the world that we want. And gosh, I think if you happen to be on the side of companies that are actively realizing that there are these silos and would love to understand how we're building the smartphone for infrastructure development that can hopefully scale your applications, you can also reach out as well. And we'd be happy to share a little bit about what we're doing.
Great. All right, so I did get one more. I was going to cut it off, but this is a good question. How do we learn more about your curriculum and your uplifting program?
Oh, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Contact us at u-pwr.co. I believe I got that correct, but hopefully there's a way to share information afterwards. That's a general email that goes to our community team, and they're really, really good at getting people whatever information they need, depending on how you'd want to join our community, whether it's through the educational programs or as an investor or an advisor or as a partner.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and energy, and just you're very inspirational. I'm sure our audience loved it. I know I did. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to watching your career as you go forward with your company.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks again. And to all the participants who've joined us, I want you to know that we have another program like this coming up in a month. This one is actually going to be documentary films, Growing Up with an Inventor. Two documentary filmmakers whose parents were inventors are going to be speaking and showing clips from their films. Our Lemelson Center Director, Arthur Demrich, is going to be moderating that. And then April 14th, we have Marilyn Hamilton. She invented the Quickie wheelchair and was an accessible tennis player who actually won the US Open. But her Quickie wheelchair is a really great story of making sport and other activities more accessible. And then on a similar vein, on May 12th, we're actually bringing together Paralympian Sarah Will and inventor Mike Schultz to talk about some of the work they've done and experience as adaptive sport athletes. So I hope you will join us. Again, these are all free. They're the first Wednesday of each month, so we hope you will join us again. And please, let's just finish with a round of virtual applause for our wonderful speaker today. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we will see you next month.